Good morning to you all. Welcome to the Staffordshire Police Fire and Crime Panel. Today is Monday the 2nd of February 2026 at 10 o'clock here at the County Buildings in Stafford. I'm Councillor Richard Cox, representing Lichfield District Council, chairing the meeting. Welcome to those that may be listening on a live recording. If I can go straight to the agenda, please, and that is item 1, with apologies.
We've received apologies from Councillors Walker from Stoke-on-Trent and Councillor Lutheran from Stafford. Councillor Fordham is attending as substitute for Stafford Borough.
Thank you very, very much, Mandy. If I can move on to item 2, and that's declarations of interest. Is anybody wishing to declare interest on any of the items presented to us on the agenda? I'm not seeing anybody signal, but may I always advise, if something does come to mind, please do indicate so it can be recorded. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 3, and that's the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of November 2025. Can I sign those as a true and accurate record of the proceedings? I'm getting nods from everybody, those that are present, so thank you very much for that, members, and I'll duly sign that. Thank you very much. So we're now moving on to items of the agenda. Those were the formalities. So we have questions to the Police Fire Crime Commissioner from members of the public. Those are set out in the before us. And are there any comments that the Commissioner may wish to make on some of them? I know that we have Mr Bradbury, which you're going to give a verbal response to, and I'll invite Mr Bradbury, if he's got any supplement question, to come forward. So are there any salient items that you want to expand on, or on those written responses?
Excuse me. Good morning, Chairman. Morning, panel. No, other than to say the questions are responded to in good time and in writing. They can be seen on the website. An unusual set of questions. Again, Chair, I wonder if the one is straying into a commercial space rather than a genuine interest in the public safety, community safety provision for Staffordshire. But all the same, people can make their own minds up online, and I'll answer anything that comes my way.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I should have said welcome to the meeting, and I didn't, so welcome. So we then have, there was 2 questions that we've had from Mr Bradbury. One is, since 2012, which Commissioner has been responsible for the biggest amount of overspend waste, Matthew Ellis or Ben Adams, is being the first question. And the second question, can the residents of Staffordshire have confidence in the 2026 financial report? So those have come from Mr Bradbury, who is with us today. But if you could answer those questions, as you've indicated would be done today, that would be very good of you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair. In answer to this question, which Commissioner has been responsible for the biggest amount of overspend or waste, Matthew Ellis or Ben Adams? As you'll know, panel, I set a budget and I scrutinise how that budget is utilised. Quite often the services have to respond to issues that occur during a year, A budget is never an exact science, and only the examples recently of increased budget required for protests, management of disorder, things of that nature might occur. Having said that, there's not been an overspend in my term as PCC. I believe the last overspend was in 2017, 2018. And I just asked the panel and Mr Bradbury to reflect that Staffordshire Police is consistently ranked as one of the most sustainable forces in the country. We've got one of the lowest levels of funding per head and a relatively high level of demand for service. We've also got probably more, or very near the top, in terms of the number of police officers who are in frontline roles. So warranted officers doing the tasks that their warrants require them to do. We're still investing, still including investment in public technology, public contact rather, technology, police officer numbers, which is in stark contrast to a number of other force areas. In response to question 2, can the residents of Staffordshire have confidence in the 2026 financial report? Yes, they absolutely can. And that's not just my view or the view of the finance team at Staffordshire Police. It's the view of independent auditors. In 24-25, they gave the service a positive opinion, the value for money statement for my office and the Chief Constable, that they have good arrangements in place led by capable and informed management teams which comprehensively understand the financial challenges faced and the arrangements needed for mitigation. All of those statements and financial reports are available on my Commissioner's website. And as you know, Chair, and we'll see it again today, there's a substantial amount of information presented to this panel. No doubt we'll go over it in some detail again today. So I welcome the scrutiny and oversight and eventually the thumbs up that I've had in the past from these panel members as well.
Thank you very much, Mr Adams. Mr Bradbury, do you have any supplement questions to each of those questions that you may have? Well, that's, I think, a question for the, obviously the Chief Constable is not in place at the present moment, so I don't know whether we can answer that in that respect, Mr Bradbury, but if there aren't, no, that's fine. If there aren't any further questions on that, we'll move on then to the item 5, which is decisions by the Commissioner. There are no decisions, so we'll move on to the main part of our agenda, I believe, for today, and that's the police precept and budget. And I'd very much like to welcome the Commissioner to introduce his report. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again, Chair. Just before I start, Chair, I'd just like to thank my financial team, including Sarah, my 151 officer, who is sent apologies today, and a big thank you to John Bloomer and his team at the Staffordshire Police finance team. We've had a really good run through budgets, budget monitoring, looking in detail at capital, looking in detail right the way through the year. And for me, this is the most professional and, if you like, well-considered budget that I've been able to present in my term. Not to put aside the difficult nature of it, given circumstances beyond our control. But thank you, John, and thank you for coming to present today. John will go into some detail in a moment. Just to set a scene for the budget, Chair, if I may. We've got a 3-year settlement, but it's a cut. It's a cut to national funding for the police service again. I'm very grateful for the comments from residents who recognise just how important their police service is to them. And they also recognise the improvements that we've been making in the last few years. There's an HMI inspection in spring, which I'm very hopeful will confirm the upward trajectory of Staffordshire Police. Against that background, to have the only option really, in my opinion, to set another precept increase which is above inflation is personally disappointing. I'm not in politics to put taxes up. However, I am in this particular job to keep people as safe as I possibly can. Over the next 3 years, if cost increases which are due to inflation and national decisions, particularly on pay, are not met centrally, and there are limits on council tax which I believe we should not exceed, then it will delay necessary investment in Staffordshire Police and it will impact service levels. I'm afraid that's the situation we're in. It's a very similar situation across the country. A couple of services, I believe, have requested additional flexibilities and they're seeking the support of their communities for that. Interesting to note the cost of that has been met by all of us. We're all paying a share of the increases in those force areas. It's not a comfortable place to be, I don't think, when community safety is right up there in the top 2 or 3 concerns of the country. However, we'll go through the detail. You'll see I'm still committed to investment, particularly in technology, because that improves productivity and will reduce our costs in the long term, but also the efficiency and effectiveness of the force. You'll also see that we're investing in necessary infrastructure, and I'm very pleased that the budget includes for 73, let me just make absolutely sure of that number, 79 additional officers compared with last year. Many of those will be in neighbourhood roles. Some of the costs of those, I'll stress some of the cost, is met by the government's neighbourhood policing guarantee. It is not the same commitment to the full cost as the previous 20,000 uplift under the previous government. However, welcome, and welcome particularly in neighbourhood roles. So there's some positivity to the budget, but for me, unfortunately, requesting that the public pay another £15 on top of their council tax payments, that's for a Band D payment, which is 4.2% and over inflation, is not the position I wanted to be in. However, I think it's the right position, and I'm hoping the panel will support it in the interests of keeping Staffordshire safe. Chairman, with your permission, can I just ask John to take us through some of the detail, and then I'll come back after.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Just take the panel through the paper and some of the background to today's budget papers. We had a 3-year comprehensive spending review set for all government departments back in June, July time. What that's translated for policing is actually a 1-year settlement, and the amounts contained in the CSR, which were specifically detailed for policing within the Home Office allocations, have not been fully passed on to forces. There's been an increase in the amounts retained by the Home Office. Notification of that change in policy came as part of the settlement the week before Christmas, which does frame to some degree the first point at 1.4 around funding uncertainty. We received a final settlement late last week. In that settlement, that outlines Staffordshire will receive the joint fifth lowest percentage grant increase in the country. If you were to equate that to us receiving the average grant increase, we would have received £0.9 million more. £0.9 million, just for an equation to council tax, is about a 0.8% difference in precept levels. So again, a relatively poor funding settlement from the government for Staffordshire. Staffordshire in itself, around its value for money position, is one of the lowest funded forces in England and Wales per head of population, and has a relative level of demand for service, i.e. calls for service, that are significantly above its relative funding level. Staffordshire is fairly unique in UK policing, having a large disconnect between the two factors. that does drive, at the face of it, that we do deliver quite strong value for money given the funding we get and what we have to respond to. Second point to draw Panel's attention to is the underfunding of pay awards and new burdens. For example, dangerous drugs that we know we talked about last year has continued to grow exponentially into the coming financial year. If you compare which table for the report, table 2.1 on page 9 of the report, just shows the impact of government funding increases and then pressures put on our budget that were greater than we'd forecast this time last year. So as a headline cash increase in government funding, that excludes Precept increases of 4.5 million. Once you then wash through unfunded pay increases above assumptions that we were given by the government for both the current financial year and next financial year, unfunded neighbourhood policing guarantee costs which are borne locally, Home Office IT costs, and new burdens around Excel bully legislation, fire investigation standards, for example. Actually, once you wash all those through, we end up £3.1 million down compared to the funding we receive, compared to the pressures we've had put on us within that. And then finally, just around workforce numbers as well. The government in mid-January announced a relaxation on police officer numbers, as in the ring fencing around police officer numbers. This is welcome. It gives the Chief Constable flexibility to design a workforce that meets the needs of Staffordshire and is more in line with the accountability framework of being held account for delivering a policing service as opposed to numbers. However, within that, there's been a new ring fence put on neighbourhood policing officer numbers, which we've yet to receive determination what that grant will look like and the conditions attached to it. So we've moved from a global ring fence around all our police officer numbers to one around a specific subset of our police officer numbers. And then finally, there's been a lack of capital grant funding for policing that comes out to local forces. This is a real challenge for forces, both around increases, the need to invest in new technology, upgrade and maintain the estate. What this means for us is a need to find the resources locally to invest in a capital programme that actually as well addresses some of the backlog maintenance issues that we have across the estate. Within the report, within the settlement as well, forces were given the opportunity, or commissioners were, to bid for additional Precept flexibility above the £15 outlined in the settlement. Two forces in addition to this have received one-off grants. That's the Metropolitan Police and Lincolnshire Police, which is funded from the core settlement grant. What this means, because it's been top sliced from core grant, is that money's been taken in essence from all forces and redistributed to those two to meet their financial challenges. We are aware of a number of force areas that have applied for Precept increases above the referendum limits. We've yet to be notified as to who they are and the reasons for why. Just in terms of the budget around some of the investments we're making, which starts at 1.7 in the report, there's an increase in police officer numbers to the highest number since 2011, which is welcome in Staffordshire. This also supports the workforce planning objective set by the Chief Constable to increase police officer numbers based on where we find ourselves, the demand and threat pitch we face. There are investments into artificial intelligence around public contact, redaction, statement writing, translation and forensics analysis, which does improve productivity and thus service to the public. There's a need to invest in EV infrastructure and sustainability schemes. This is not funded by government, but remains a government mandate that's been placed on policing in the wider public sector. For example, if we were to fully upgrade a police station for EV infrastructure, you're talking in a region of £750,000 to £1 million, we estimate, per station, given that the demands that we have around vehicle fleet in that space. Our capital programme continues to modernise the estate, drive digital improvement, as well as continuing fleet replacement programmes. And again, some of the previous decision notes you'll have seen at panel covering body-worn video increasing ANPR coverage alongside the latest taser technology once that's been approved by the Home Office. Just then to take the panel through where we are around generally pay inflation pressures. We're asked by which starts at 2.7 on page 9. We're asked by the government to budget this time last year for a 2.8% pay award. The final pay award given and police officer and police staff pay awards run from a September year, not from an April year, was 4.2%. Funding was received in this current financial year on a one-off basis. Ongoing, forces are expected to pick up the differential between the two. The differential between the two equates to something in the region of £3 million worth of cost pressure on its own. And whilst a pay award that is above inflation is always welcome, there is an impact on what we can do with the money we have available. given we were expected to fund the difference. Inflation again remains sticky, it remains higher than the Bank of England 2% inflation target. That has fed through into some of the contractual pressure we see coming through and feeds through into some of the cost pressures around the capital programme as well. And again, just I've kind of talked about table 2.10, I can't underscore enough the impact of government funding decisions versus government pressures that are put on us that remain outside of our control. £3.1 million worth of savings, if you equate that to Precept, about just shy of a 3% increase in Precept, just to stand still with those pressures coming through. Then just around where we're on settlement for the coming year, as I've talked earlier, we still have no conditions on labour policing grant for the coming financial year. In this financial year, the grant conditions were not received to June, which is a quarter of the way through the financial year, which makes planning incredibly difficult and introduces a level of risk that I personally am not comfortable with as a Section 151 officer. And we still have no confirmation on some items such as hotspot patrols that, again, when you look at some of the results that's delivered over the last 12, 18 months, has made a real difference to the communities of Staffordshire. To cover off these, cover off what still remains a partial settlement, even following what the government termed a full settlement last week, we've included a £250,000 contingency in the budget to cover these risk items. So, if I just take colleagues through the paper, section 5 in the report on page 14 just sets out in detail some of the investments that have been made locally into Staffordshire Police. So whilst we talk about having a difficult financial position, and it is, and that is driven largely by national decisions around funding of forces, I do want to emphasise some of the positivity around the investments being made in Staffordshire Police. There are more police officers in Staffordshire, as I've said earlier, than there have been since 2010. That is welcome. And again, in Staffordshire, we are currently benchmarked the third highest in the country in terms of where the role police officers are doing are the roles that require a warrant card. Again, nationally, a significant number of police officers, because of ring fences around numbers, police officer numbers, have increasingly moved away from roles that require a warrant card, i.e. frontline policing roles, into roles that are in what you might term the back or mid-office. Staffordshire has a really good track record of maintaining police officers doing the role the public expect them to do. So whilst we have a distinctly low number of police officers driven by our funding position, the assurance is that our police officers are doing the role they need to do with the powers that they have that are unique to being a warranted police officer. Within this space as well, just we talk about kind of the uplift in funding from government, there is a mandation to increase police officer numbers in neighbourhood roles by 26 more in 2026-27. Only 40% of that, the cost of those, are funded. The government's expectation on this is you either fund the required balance locally to meet those numbers that are mandated, or you move them from other functions into neighbourhood roles. By moving them from other functions to neighbourhood roles, we don't increase overall the number of police officers, and secondly, we would pull the policing model in a direction that might not be the right thing for Staffordshire. Those officers have been taken from other roles and placed in neighbourhood roles. Therefore, within this budget, the funding is contained to grow the establishment by 26 in full. That does mean difficult choices elsewhere, as you'll see in some of the savings appendices, but overall, on balance, that is the right, we feel as a management team, that's the right decision to have taken. Just looking forward through the MTFS and then future assumptions, pay award next year is assumed at 3%, falling to 2.5% thereafter. Last year, pay awards were assumed to be 2.5% in 26-27, falling to 2% thereafter. There remains a significant challenge around pay pressures going forward, given the award of pay awards does not sit within local discretion. We do not have control as a sector over pay awards given. Each 1% in pay costs us something in the region of £2.4 million. So if we were to receive a pay award of 4%, not 3%, that would put £2.4 million pressure in our budget, which is equivalent to about a 2% increase in council tax. So for the purposes of a conversation around gearing, a 3% pay award, if funded all entirely locally without savings, would equate to a 6% increase in Precept. Page 7 just sets out some of the sensitivity analysis for panel, just around the cost, the changes in terms of pay, utilities, third-party costs and Precept increases within that paper. And again, just within the future CSR assumptions, it's worth calling out, we are going to talk about having a 1-year settlement but a 3-year CSR, which makes planning difficult. The CSR we assume going forwards equates to a £14 increase in Precept in 27-28 and also in 28-29. That's decision reserved for the Commissioner. It is worth pointing out to panel that is a starting point assumption from the government to deliver a standstill position in policing services, i.e. above inflation Precept increases deliver a standstill. Colleagues from a local authority will recognise that position too, again within their funding settlements. That is the same assessment. There has been some positive news again around our police staff local government pension scheme, so the Staffordshire pension scheme. The triennial re-evaluation was undertaken last year for contribution rates starting in April. For us, that has reduced employer contribution rates by 4.5%, which is most welcome, from 21.5% down to 17%. In cash terms, that's about a £3 million per year reduced contribution. That in itself is a major reason as to why we've been able to both increase police officer numbers, fully fund them, and also protect the policing model as is, and still invest within the policing service. Section 8 just takes the panel through the reserves position. The Commission's reserve strategy sets out a minimum general fund reserve of 3% of the net revenue budget. General fund currently stands at 3.59% of the 25-26 net revenue budget. The budget for 26-27 includes the use of £1.488 million from the budget support reserve. That is a reduction on the £3.5 million withdrawn in the current financial year, and again whilst used to balance the position, was if you go back to where we were this pre-settlement in December, we had closed the budget gap without using reserves based on the assumptions in the CSR funding coming to forces. So a welcome reduction in the use of reserves to support the budget compared to the current financial year, but of course being the use of reserves is one-off and temporary. So the capital programme, page 9, just sets out in some highlight detail. There's more detail in the detailed capital report in the paper. Just taking you through this, our capital financing costs compared to the budget set for the current financial year reduced for the next 3 years, and then have a small increase versus the budget for 29-30. We've undertaken as part of our MTFS work a review of when capital programmes are due to start, when they conclude, what is contained within them, and also our long-term cash position. We've made significant savings over the last number of years by repaying outstanding loans and taking no new loans out, and our cash balances remain healthy. However, over the course of the MTFS, that is due to move to a position where we're required to borrow, in part because we continue to repay loans and not refinance them. The total capital programme set out across the 4 years contains particularly worth drawing your note to improvements in both custody facilities. So the proposed full refurbishment of custody in the north, so Northern Area Custody Facility, which is based at Festival Park in Stoke, and the MTFS contains provision, and I stress the word provision, for the replacement of Southern Area Custody, which is currently at Watling. So no business case has yet been drawn up or presented or approved. However, for the purposes of the panel papers, we've included within it for the cost of the most prudent position, which is the full replacement of Southern Area Custody Facility. So just around the rationale as to why Northern Area Custody Facility contains 15 cells, Southern Area Custody Facility contains 15. There's a real imbalance around custody provision in the county that at some point will require addressing. Within the programme as well, that contains the full the usual items around fleet replacement programme. There is an investment in operational equipment around increased refresh of tasers to the latest taser model. Once that's had final Home Office approval, which we've been waiting for 2 years now. And there is, in terms of our digital investments, again, a continuation and a steady state position, both around addressing backlog issues in digital provision, and also making the most of AI and robotics within that as well. Just worth as well, around some of the benefits of that IT investment, we've invested this year in robotic process automation. That has, just as an example and a headline of that does the work of one individual within 20 minutes. So that the pace that this can get through in terms of the benefits it delivers is pretty stark. That has allowed us to make our first saving in the MTFS from the removal of 2 vacant posts in the first area that robotics has been applied. And just around the appendices within the report, there are the usual appendices. So Appendix 1 just sets out the revenue budget for 26-27. Appendix 2 is the usable reserves forecast. Appendix 3 is the surplus and deficit by billing authority. And again, within this, there is compared to last year, there is a small surplus on the collection fund, whereas last year we had a deficit. Council tax base is Appendix 4. That has gone up by a lower than originally estimated amount. What I would say around the increase in council tax base is the council tax base across the country are increasing by a slower rate than has been forecast. That remains a challenge and something to watch for us going forward, despite we have a place to increase property numbers by £1.5 million over the life of the government, where you get to see the impacts of that coming through in our council tax base figures. Appendix 5 just sets out both the precept levels, the annual precept levels, and then the amount per billing authority is set out there. And Appendix 6 sets out the summary financial position from 26-27 to 29-30. Within that, you'll observe that by 29-30, we still have to identify another £21.982 million worth of savings or increases in precept to close that gap. That's a significant savings challenge. However, looking back over over the same period going back, those savings have been delivered within that time frame, and the budget has always been underspent since 2017-2018. Appendix 7 sets out the capital programme in detail within that, and Appendix 8 sets out the Force and Commissioner's Office savings programme, and the final appendix is the precept consultation outcomes and some commentary from the public around that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, John. I'm hoping you appreciate the level of detail in the papers there and some of the difficulties that John and other finance leads across the country have had in bringing their budgets together with such a late set of announcements. I'd just like to be absolutely clear. The increase in council tax is 5.22%. I think I said 4.2 at the start. I'm interested to see why a national government paper thinks it's 4.2, but we'll sort that out later. It's 5.22%. So a late settlement. We've got additional funding that's been presented as a positive nationally. The bulk of that is going to the centre. It doesn't meet increased costs of inflation, increased costs of nationally set pay levels, and it puts pressure on services. Chair, at the same time, how local forces spend their money has been restricted. The neighbourhood policing guarantee requires it spent in certain areas. I happen to agree with some of that, but not at the expense of officers and commitment to other areas. And let's remember, it's not a fully funded increase of 13,000. It actually requires the redeployment of officers from other jobs. Now, I don't know what jobs those are. Domestic abuse, maybe? Road traffic? Corruption? Fraud? I just don't know. But in Staffordshire, our officers are all busy. So it's a move for me that was underpinned again in the news last Monday around police reform, a shift to the centre, except for funding, of course, which is a shift to the local people in the last few years and looks set to continue for the next few too. A white paper that essentially was the death knell for Staffordshire Police as we go from 43 forces possibly down to a dozen. Now, there may well in the long term be some savings as a result of the amalgamation of administration and enabling functions. But I can tell you in this last week that has already given me significant pause as to how we invest and the projects we invest in. It would not be prudent for me necessarily to invest in technology investments until we know who we're working with, what systems they're working, what training obligations there are, and other matters. I think this is a national issue. There's a real risk in reform of this nature without pace and clarity. Give us the detail fast, please, so I can make some decisions in the interest of Staffordshire's residents. There's a statement nationally about spending power. As John's just outlined, £4.5 million extra. It should have been 8.6 extra to cover the costs that have gone up as a result of national decisions. Do they take us for fools? Spending power's up, but you've got less. And I do give massive credit to everybody across the service for delivering the savings in all of the nearly 5 years now that I've been Commissioner. Almost everything that's been placed on that savings register has been delivered, which is greatly to their credit, and I don't believe we've seen a significant impact on the front line, although I can tell you it does put some pressure on the organisation. As John said, we're going to continue to use reserves, but those reserves are dwindling. We're not building them, we're using them. This is, in theory, a safety net, but we have to do it to balance the budget. And, Chair, it is a good, balanced budget. I hope you find the papers clear. Everybody's contributing to those savings, including another £350,000 off my office's budget. And I'm very, very much aware, if those of you who have looked ahead to the consultation responses, a few people saying, thank you very much, you all do a great job. But the majority uncomfortable about paying more money, and they have some issues with the level of service they perceive they're receiving or they have actually received. And that keeps me busy every day of the week. But there's some questions in there about my own role being abolished, etc. I can assure you I'm very much thinking ahead to 2 years' time. I want to hand over a service that is as lean and right-sized as possible. There's big change there as well. Big opportunities for things to go wrong under new oversight and governance. So the simpler and more straightforward we can pass on a service, the better. But I particularly want to thank the residents of Staffordshire, because in that consultation they indicated in the main they would like to continue to support their police service. And I thank them for that.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I have to say the consultation responses was on the borderline in the sense of no increase, but it was pretty obvious the majority were looking at and accepting that there would be an increase. I just want to receive assurances that those, if we were to obviously accept your precept and budget, that we do see the evidence coming through that to give that confidence towards the public that they are getting what I suppose you could say value for money. But it's is one to watch. So I'm going to open to the councillors and independent member for good, robust scrutiny, I hope. So I'm going to ask everybody who would like to kick off. Yes, Chris Elliott, our independent member.
Oh, I'm on. Thank you, Chair. Thanks. Thanks for the report. And I think, as the independent person on the panel, I'd like to thank you and your team and the Police and Fire Service for the work that you're doing in a particularly difficult environment. So I recognise that, and that must have lots of pressures on budgets as well. So that's the first thing. So the question for me, just a couple of questions around the savings. One was the enabling services savings are all in the 26-27 year. So is that achievable? I know you've said in your statement that you've always delivered your savings, but the enabling services savings are all in that year of next year. That's £3 million. Is that too ambitious? Because it's all happening then. And then in amongst that, you've got one saving through estate rationalisation of 163,000 next year, but no other estate rationalisation expectations. So are you thinking of doing something in the next 3 years after that with the estates?
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Elliott. And thanks to the services. They're going to appreciate it. The savings history in recent years has been absolutely on the money. Last year there was there's a slight delay, a rollover on some of the savings related to the review of shift panels for PCSOs. So that's in the operational space. The enabling one have all been delivered. I went through these in some detail with John a few weeks ago. I'm comfortable with them. There's a pretty rigorous process of reviewing every area's budgets, and these are generally agreed and signed up to by the elements of the team themselves. So it's not sort of top down. You will go and find these savings. It's understood everything is planned and in place. They're substantial, and they won't be completely painless, because we're getting to a point where, after a number of years of making savings, it starts to cause issues, and demand is increasing. We're arresting more people. That's more people to manage in terms of criminal justice prosecution hub type activity, for example. And of course the courts are struggling to maintain their pace. They still haven't recovered from the backlog in COVID. So we're holding on to victims, holding on to relationships with those who have been affected for longer than we used to in the past as well. So it's all hard work. In terms of estates, the biggest challenge for us, and as John has mentioned, the custody upgrades, they are necessary. There are still some choices. There's a big piece of work at the moment around options for a southern custody suite. Now, whether that's a new site, whether it's an upgrade to the existing one, it will be a substantial investment. I think that investment is going to be required regardless of police reform, because buildings tend to be related to where the population is, where the action is. Technology, back office, not so much. So in terms of the inertia I mentioned earlier, I think we'll be continuing to invest in those areas. And the key thing there is the safety of everybody involved, particularly whilst we're arresting more people. So I'm confident in that. John, any comments just on the certainty around enabling services? By the way, we keep an eye on this every single month. There's no question of if there's slippage, there's a little bit of something else meets the gap. But it's not straightforward.
Thank you. For me, there's 2 points to make. Firstly, is whilst the government's removed ring fence around police officer numbers, we continue to increase them. So there are no savings per se attached to reducing headcount. There's saving around rank mix in there. What that does mean is the area that we have locally to find savings from looks smaller than our overall budget, which then predominantly means it does fall in areas such as enabling services. Just in terms of confidence of delivering them, we have a good track record delivering savings to date. So history gives me some confidence we'll deliver them going forward. A significant number of these are already in flight or have already been delivered and contribute in part to the underspend we see in year. So in terms of confidence delivery, I'm as confident as I can be around delivering those as they're set out today. Going forward with the budget gap we've got, we will continue to have to look at areas such as enabling services for a disproportionate share of savings if we are to protect. What does come through in the consultation report around protecting police officer numbers does remain in line with what the Chief Constable is asking around more police officers. Those are areas of business we're going to continually have to take significant savings out of. But based on what we've delivered to date, and based on the fact that a number of these have already been delivered as we go into the financial year, I'm confident of delivery on them.
Thank you. You okay with that? Yep. Councillor Screen?
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, thank you. I'd like to mirror the thanks to the service, as Mr Allett has done, second to none both services. Commissioner, you stated that Staffordshire Police has already met demanding savings targets and would deliver a further 15 million in efficiencies next year. Yet this Precept increase raised roughly 12 million from residents up front, For the panel to provide proper assurance, can you set out precisely why those efficiencies cannot be delivered before asking residents for an above-inflation rise and identify the specific services that would be at risk without this additional Precept funding? Now, do you want to answer that one first? I do have a second question.
Commissioner, if you'd like to answer that, and then I'll come back to you,
Yep.
Councillor Screen.
Sorry, Councillor Screen, I got some of that, but I was struggling just to hear the second bit of your question. Would you mind repeating it again? Excuse me, my hearing's not the best.
Do you want one of the ear loops? For the panel to provide proper assurance, can you set out precisely why those efficiencies cannot be delivered before asking residents for an above-inflation rise and identify the specific services that would be at risk without the additional Precept funding?
Yeah, put quite simply, these are not free savings. There's some vacancies in there, and they'll be realised, as John said, straight away, and that's already having an impact on reducing the demand in future years. But all of these will have some sort of implication for service delivery, and it will need managing and properly planning in. We don't plan, I think it's fair to say, for government to continue to reduce costs for essential public services. So this is not a sort of you won't see there 5 years projections on savings in each department. We're working these into place as and when they become available, and given the circumstances, and circumstances change. You've heard earlier how we definitely want some more police officers. There's a lot of police forces in the country at the moment don't. They don't need more police officers. They've got officers who aren't in frontline roles like ours. They actually need more staff, more professionals, more technically committed people who are in a position to go at where crime is increasing, which is online and in areas like fraud, not in traditional crime areas where, as you've seen in Staffordshire in recent years, burglary, violence, etc., are dramatically reducing. So this is a case of making savings as and when necessary and then implementing them as quickly as possible. I'm absolutely assured that if any windfalls or savings had come up during the year, then John and his team would have played them in to this budget calculation.
And your second question?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. For the panel to exercise its statutory scrutiny role, can you provide a clear, itemised breakdown showing exactly which transformation projects or service improvements this Precept rise will fund, along with a timetable and measurable outcomes? And can you confirm what independent verification will be available to the public so the public can see that these commitments have been delivered and the Precept has achieved what you were claiming for it?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Screen. Yes, as mentioned before in the answer to the public question, we've got external auditors that come in and look at all our processes. We've also got our independent auditing team. All of their papers are also visible on my website. I conduct scrutiny on a regular basis. We have a transformation dedicated scrutiny panel which looks at transformation, that's delivering the savings essentially, and the future board budget changes. So it's a pretty robust process. Now my approach with Precept, unlike some other places and unlike predecessors, I'm not going to the public and asking for extra money, particularly for particular investments. I don't run the organisation. The Chief Constable and the professionals do. What I'm looking to do is to provide the funding that they say they need to manage across the board. There are key investments there, as you've heard. This 79 extra officers is a commitment, but it will be met in the round. It's not specifically tied to the Precept increases. I'm very comfortable, and I hope you are, as a result of seeing the papers last year which set out the savings, that they have all been met. As I say, there's a delay in delivering some of the PCSO shift change, but those will be realised in the forthcoming months. So I'm comfortable with the oversight of the of that. John, is there anything I've missed there in terms of scrutiny? It's not, how can I put this? It's not like I'm not keeping an eye on you, is it?
Politely, Ben has two eyes on us at all times around those things. I think just around the external audit as a validation piece, our external auditors this year for our accounts for last year have scored us, in essence, they rate over, I think it's 10 or 12 different areas of business. Each one has come out green, as in the highest rating you can get. So from an external validation point of view, around what we're doing, they are really comfortable where we were at, and they are, again, they took to our public audit committee around putting us in the top tier of forces and public bodies that they look at. So from an external assurance point of view, they've given us that within that. In terms of then line-by-line transformation benefits, again, we have quarterly strategic governance boards where that's brought through on a line-by-line basis and analysed. And again, at public performance meetings, again, we start to touch on some of that value for money stuff within those public performance meetings as well.
Thank you. Councillor Scrind, you want to come back and any supplementary? No? Okay, thank you very much. I'll bring in Councillor Fordham and then Councillor Atkins. Councillor Fordham, Stafford Borough Council.
Thank you, Chair. And may I thank the Commissioner and his team for what I thought was a very clear analysis and presentation. My question essentially is about the robustness of reserves. I'm looking at Appendix 2 on page 47 if people want to reference that. I think it's important that we understand the reality on the ground, as reserves can often be the balancing factor in a budget under pressure. I understand from the paper that earmarked reserves are being reduced from current levels over the coming years as projects complete, and a significant proportion are not being replaced. And I assume that's because of lack of available funds rather than lack of need, as normally we might expect a fairly regular expenditure to meet service levels, required service levels. So my first question is, to what degree are future service levels at risk? And if I can just give the second question at the same time, that relates to the general reserves which are being maintained at the current level, which seems to me to be providing very few weeks of cover. So to what extent is this heavily constrained by lack of revenue? And does this provide the flexibility to cover for unforeseen events? And how does it compare as a level with other authorities? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Fordham. Earmarked reserves, as you know, are specific to areas of investment or expected identified savings. So they are generally put in place and then spent as those pressures arise. There's a bit of uncertainty around one or two. I've mentioned before here that the new emergency services network that is some years delayed, multi-billion pound national project. Had some assurance the other day that ambulance are moving ahead quite quickly, police and fire due to follow in the next 2 years. At the minute, whilst we have some reserves set aside for that, nationally it's assumed that forces haven't reserved enough, and we do not know yet the cost of the technology, the handsets, and everything else required to accommodate the new network. But I'm very comfortable earmarked reserves are what they need to be in terms of identified projects. I'll ask John just to pick up on the general reserve, but it's my understanding is it's set at a sort of nationally expected level. Reserves are very interesting, and I know this isn't a scrutiny of councils, but I've had when I was involved as a councillor, some councils have big reserves, some have very little. and I think both are wrong. You need your reserves at the right sort of level. It's not appropriate to set council taxes when you've got big reserves. We've got the right level of reserves. But I am anxious, as I said before, if this spending trend continues, then we will be like other places. We will start having to look at redundancies and look at job losses. And that is something we've been really, really determined to try and avoid. And we've done a pretty good job of it in recent years. So thank you for drawing us to the reserves. John, could you just confirm, we're in the right place on the general reserve, aren't we? And perhaps you could mention the budget reserve, which has served us well in recent years, but is depleting.
Absolutely. Thank you. Just in terms of general fund reserves for policing, so give or take, we are not encouraged not to hold a reserve above 5%, and indeed there is additional reporting required to Home Office if that goes above 5%. 3% has always been used as a benchmark locally, based on the fact that the Home Office will fund up to three significant events in year, subject to us funding the first 1% of that event. And that 1% is the totality of our budget, so you can afford 3 of those big events in year. If you think about what those big events are likely to be, we saw disorder in Staffordshire 18 months ago. 2 days of disorder, two events of disorder over 2 days, cost the service £3 million. That's a significant amount of money. Now, thankfully, the government fully funded that in the end. That took them over 6 months to confirm that position. So in terms of holding that general fund reserve, you're right, it could be depleted very, very quickly with some big events. What I don't want to be in a position as a 151 officer is telling my operational colleagues, by the way, you've got something going off over here, can you watch the pennies right now, please? That's completely the wrong approach. So there is a balance in there, but there is the Home Office safety net around special grant funding. In terms of how we compare to other areas, our reserves look relatively healthy compared to others. I say relatively healthy compared to other police forces. There is a increasing disconnect, like there is across local government, between those that are okay, their reserves look relatively healthy, and those that are literally on the breadline. What the advantage of holding reserves for us is, if you look at the total reserves there, that they are, in essence, cash reserves. We invest that money. That investment, that money generates a return or avoids us needing to borrow externally. That provides good value for the taxpayer. So even if they're just sitting there per se, they do generate a return for us. And we think interest rates that we receive on our investments are around 4% at the moment in time, and borrowing money would be about 5%. Doing the maths on that level of reserves gives you an indication as to what that's doing to that balance sheet strength is doing to our bottom line position. In terms of the budget support reserve, that has been up at about £6 million, just over £6 million. That will fall following the draw for 26-27 to just shy of £3 million. That does provide us with some flex in future years, which is helpful and useful around finding ongoing savings and avoiding consequences of making fast time decisions around savings. If you look at other forces around the country, some have taken significant numbers of police staff in particular out, and I suspect with a reduction in the ring fence around police officer numbers will take significant numbers of police officers out to balance their books. For us, that budget support reserve does provide some insulation against that consequence, at least in the short term. Some of the other reserves that are in there are interesting. The ESN reserve is interesting. Police and fire are expected to fund the costs of ESN implementation locally. The NHS is receiving funding from central government to do so. So there's a difference in approach there as well within that. And again, pay and pensions reserve, whilst ideally something we would probably not like to hold at that value, increasingly we're seeing pay awards coming in above budgeted assumptions. Our budgeted assumptions are based on what we're told at a point in time by the Home Office they think is likely. As you've seen this year, we were told to budget 2.8%. It comes in at 4.2 in September. That swing on that percentage would pretty much eat up the majority of that reserve in a one-off go. So increasingly we're holding reserves actually against risk that's imposed on us and changes in that policy direction that are to some degree unhelpful around setting our future direction of travel. That said, our level of reserves, our levels of debt, our ability to deliver savings, when you benchmark 43 police forces, certainly puts us in the top quartile around financial sustainability. And that ongoing sustainability is what delivers and enables us to build a truly outstanding police service, and certainly have the ambition to go towards that. We're not firefighting in the way that others are doing. We're not having to firefight against a budget crisis. Actually, you look at some of our outcomes we're delivering as a service, they're going in the right direction. crime, things like neighbourhood crime down 13%, arrests up, for example. The organisation is going in the right direction. I think financial sustainability has a real key part to play in giving that solid base for operational excellence to flow from.
Councillor Fordham?
That's fine, Chair. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you very much, and I think that was quite a good comprehensive response to that in terms of the reserves. So thank you, Councillor Fordham. Councillor Atkins, my Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, Commissioner. First of all, there's a significant dip in capital investment in estates for the year 2027-28. Why is that, particularly in view of the 10-year maintenance backlog that you reference in your documents? And what will the impact of that be?
Thank you, Councillor Atkins. Yeah, there's a certain amount of uncertainty around which projects we can bring forward. Not quite right to describe a wish list on the capital programme, but there is one. There's certainly a programme of potential investments in certain stations and continuing to improve the working environment for the officers. The uncertainty is really around the balance off with the Southern Custody project. Such is the nature of that. Depending on the best way forward operationally and in terms of affordability, it may well be we can play back in some particular estates works around station improvements and indeed in some cases rationalisation and repositioning of staff. So I would like to set out a more detailed capital programme around the general estate, but didn't feel it was appropriate whilst we're not quite there on the custody options just yet. There could be a swing of even £10 million one way or the other as a result of that.
So are you basically saying that that 12 million is more of a provisional figure and that this may change over time? I mean, I appreciate there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of reorganisation of police, and therefore certain investments you probably won't want to proceed with. I mean, particularly we're talking about technology, and I can understand that if you've got a larger force, you would want to have consistent technology across that whole service. So I can understand that, but obviously this sort of dip from 20 million to 12 million is very significant and not something which I think we can allow to go forward without some sort of clear explanation.
Thank you, Councillor Atkins. You're right. It's partly that. It's partly the uncertainty. There wasn't much I welcomed in the Home Secretary's announcement last Monday, but her one statement that this review of what the new number of reduced forces is likely to look like should report back to her in the summer. I gave a sigh of relief, quite frankly. We absolutely need certainty on who we're partnering up with. Similar, and you've all been sat as councillors for 2 years now, looking at the devolution question and the local government reorganisation. Who are you partnering up with? Where do we need our buildings? What do we need those buildings to deliver? It is exactly the same for Staffordshire Police. Operationally, it sounds like we're still going to have local policing areas, which is absolutely essential, and that will mean we need stations, places for officers and staff to meet and muster operationally. But in terms of the future about where our enabling services sit, that is subject to some clarity. But equally here, depending on the custody suite decision, and I will be bringing that to the panel in very much the same way as I did with the firearms investment. I want you to see the detail, the nature of the questions we're posing, and the nature of the choices. This is a big decision for Staffordshire. Depending on that, it may be we can re-inject or move some of that capital back into our general estate investment. And I must say, whilst there are areas of Staffordshire's estate which aren't where I'd want them, in the main, it's pretty good. is pretty good. Most people are working in really good working environments. The investment we put into Longton recently, that's a terrific opportunity. Anybody who wants to go and visit that and see the sort of working environment you should have if people are trying to keep us safe, go and have a look at Longton. I'd like to do a little bit more of that, but you know, you've got to cut your cloth, and we've got to have an eye to the future. So I think that level of reserve, that level in the capital programme is prudent, but not necessarily fixed, which is really where, and John and I have had quite a few discussions about this over the last few months. It's where we need it to be in terms of covering without understating the financial requirement for capital. It would be quite wrong if I undervalued the investment, because there's an implication in terms of the revenue budget. But exactly where it goes depends on that big custody project and police reform.
The second question is about police numbers. It's good to see that the establishment of 2,083 full-time equivalents is the highest figure over the last 15 years. It raises the question, therefore, you know, what happened in the previous 15 years that we're now, you know, and you're saying how constrained the budget is, that we've managed to get to that figure. You talk about 79 extra officers. I think in the document it says 71, but we're not going to quibble about eight officers. But you also say that Staffordshire has the most inexperienced front line in terms of frontline police officers. Now, in a particular area, domestic abuse, clearly experience is really important in that area, because let's be honest, police forces in general, I'm not just talking about Staffordshire, have not been brilliant on the whole issue of domestic abuse over the years. So it's really important that we have people who are experienced, and not just the specialist officers, because obviously frontline officers have to be in a position whereby they can recognise the signs of domestic abuse, and it has a huge impact, you know, on the effectiveness of the force. So in terms of the police numbers, clearly that has an impact on, you know, if pay awards are underfunded, then clearly having a large force is going to have an impact on the budget. But is the fact that we have an inexperienced frontline force a matter of policy, in the sense that inexperienced officers are presumably cheaper than experienced officers?
No, it's definitely not a choice. John, Master just asked, what is the... Can you just confirm the number of extra we put into the budget, please? I understood it was 79, is it?
So the establishment at the budget, so the budget that was brought last year had an establishment of 2002 FTE, so an additional, to move to 2083, the number is wrong, it should say 81, not 71, there's a typo in there. So it was 2002 in the budget papers last year, it's 2083 so this year.
None of us were right then. 81 is better, I'm gonna stick with that. I've mentioned before to this panel in previous meetings, Staffordshire is one, I believe, of only 2 or 3 forces that is not at its record number of police officers. We still haven't got back to the most we ever had, which is very disappointing, and it's why we're one of the few that still want more, and we need them. In the last few years, particularly the protest management has involved operational requirement. Warranted officers can be told, sorry folks, you're losing your rest days, we need you at this spot on a Friday morning with virtually no notice. You don't have that flexibility with staff or PCSOs. And the nature of the front line means we need more officers. In terms of experience, it's definitely something that's been recognised, because we've increased our numbers during my period as Commissioner and just before, more rapidly in terms of percentage than most of the forces. And by their very nature, most recruits are young. Not all of them. They come from all walks of life. Fantastic. I absolutely love meeting the new officers at their attestations. But the other thing we've done is to really make it a very attractive offer to come to Staffordshire as a transferee. and we've been bringing in experienced officers from all over the region and further afield to try and bring in that experience. Having said that, Councillor Atkins, the bulk of the influx 2 or 3 years ago, they're pretty experienced now. They've been out there, they've been on the response teams, they've been working with colleagues, learning from the best. And I think we're in a very good position. There are other places that are a little concerned perhaps about officers who have been around a little bit longer, who are less comfortable with the new technology, the new requirements, the new victims code. And as you referred to, policing has really changed in terms of its attitudes over the last 20, 30 years. So I think we've got a good balance for the future, puts us in a great place to take advantage of new ways of working. But yes, we still want some more officers, hence it being in that budget. And it's not a want, it's a need, an operational need. I've also said before, we went too far in Staffordshire. Officer numbers were reduced. It mirrored crime reduction. Crime went down dramatically about 10, 12 years ago. So we didn't need, we perceived, the force numbers that we now know we do need. That was before the internet, before online issues, before the abuse, before the vulnerability was exposed. And that's where most of the crime is now, unfortunately, and most of the growth in crime, certainly. So the world has changed again. It changes very quickly in community safety. And whilst I appreciate that means you don't stand still. So police reform is, it's not wrong to look at police reform, but be very, very careful about the costs and the implications whilst you manage that and the delay. And let's design something in that's flexible for the future and allows people to make local decisions. I take your point, but we're in good shape. And the extra investment of 100 officers, which is mentioned in the report around the public protection unit, that is very much children and vulnerable people, a lot of which is related to relationships, as you're aware.
Councillor Dean, Tamworth Borough.
Thank you. Just thank you, Commissioner, and your team for the paperwork we've received. It's really useful and easy to read. My question is around the grants that you give out to the local areas. As with everybody else, as you've said, your budget is going down, and it's not going as far. I know from the paperwork that we've had that our money in Tamworth will now be severely cut. My question is around what contingencies have you got in place? Because the work that this funds is around the prevention and the distraction work, really, really useful. And my worry is if something came up, not hopefully on a scale of the Troubles, but there are incidents that come up that need something, that need us to look at, maybe putting a piece of work in place. Do you have any contingency budget that you would be able to bring to the fore for us?
Thanks, Councillor Dean, and a big thank you to you and all the local councils that have, at the moment, you're responsible for the community safety partnerships. This is one of the pieces of work that my office do that certainly the majority of those commenting on the consultation response might not appreciate. There's a lot of work goes into prevention as well as supporting victims of crime and antisocial behaviour. And your role as councils, along with housing associations and police around antisocial behaviour is really, really important. The majority of that really should sit with authorities, not with the police. So it's vital. I've been very, very comfortable with supporting local funding and local autonomy over a grant fund. And now, Tamworth, it might be £50,000–60,000 a year that you've had local discretion over how you use that in the interests of the community. And that might not sound like a lot, but if you add it up over all the authorities in Staffordshire, it was getting on for £700,000 or £800,000. Quite frankly, I cannot afford that. I cannot afford it because of these budget restrictions. It's one of the things that's not written in the detail. I've written out to colleagues to suggest that I can only offer about half of that amount of money for the next 2 years. I'm hoping to guarantee it. I'll be mixing it in terms of your local flexibility, but also supporting things like the antisocial behaviour case reviews, independent chairs for those, people who get repeat issues. I provide support for domestic homicide reviews in some places. We will continue to look at that because that's an evolving area. And I'm going to provide some funding to the local policing team to agree how they use it in partnership with the CSP. I'm also putting in place a £100,000 fund for you to bid into for exactly that type of situation you're talking about, something that may well arise during the year. I keep some reserves. I'm going to be taking those reserves down as low as I can prior to that transfer to the new governance coming in a couple of years. But it is there again for a prevention essential. So not quite where I wanted to be, but I'm retaining my commitment to local community safety partnerships. I'm one of a handful left, Councillor Dean, in the country that does that. Most others retain that money centrally and distribute on a pure grant project basis. But you know Tamworth better than someone in Stafford. So, and equally, people in Stafford know Stafford better than someone in Tamworth. The other thing on my mind there, and this is a bit more sensitive, we are going to be going to unitary authorities very soon. I have some nervousness about the distraction and the confusion during that period of change. So whilst I want to be close as possible to community safety partnerships, we're going, I believe, from 10 to possibly 2 or 3. There'll be a lot of review of how they work locally, and I would like to try and right-size my commitment to that so that when we get to the unitaries, there's some funding there to support their activity, but it's not necessarily slipping full attention in the next 2 years when we're all, quite frankly, distracted by the reform. Could I just say you do a great job with that? All the councils do, all the community safety officers, they do some fantastic work. The only thing we don't do is shout about it enough, because there's a big benefit to confidence if people think their local council and the police are working together to address issues.
Can I just come back
Councillor
on
Dean,
that?
yeah.
Heartily agree that we should be making sure people know that these are joint funded things. With regard to the LGR and all that's bringing to it, we just need that decision as soon as possible so that we can start putting those things in place, because as you say, absolutely everything will change in size. We'll be going down to those 2, 3, 5, whatever it will be. And we need to make sure that we're talking to one another as soon as possible. Really good to know that there are a couple of pots that we'll be able to come to if we so need. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to comment? If I may, then, Commissioner, I think there's been some good, robust questioning and answers there. But I just want to address, obviously, the consultation that you did, because I think it's important, obviously, that we just squeeze out of that where we've got. Obviously, the numbers given, it was obviously anybody will say, and I think we all do deep down in our minds, we don't want any increases at all. So I want to try and address to where obviously the greater percentage obviously said that they did want an increase. But then if we were breaking it down, in terms of the age groups, etc., that you see, do you feel there's a way that we've probably missed the opportunity to try and attract younger people to answer? And how do you feel that could be overcome, taking into account that actually majority of people said they picked the consultation on social media? So it seems that we seem to be in the right area, but we're not quite attracting where it really, in a sense, matters. Because, I mean, there's an emphasis on youth now, very much, and if the government do go to 16 voting, then it's very clear that we've got to really make sure that those young people who are making, you know, they're going to be making a massive decision who they wish to govern and so forth, that they do understand where they are. How do you feel that we could reach out that little bit more? Because it was an interesting one to see.
It is, Chair, and I just draw members' attention, page 73, I think it is in your pack. I deliberately asked for a bit of a review of the last 5 years on the consultation. So I'm pleased it's gone up from 964 respondents in 22-23 to 2,370 this year, which is the most we've ever had. The team do a terrific work at reaching out everywhere. And like you said, social media, which in theory is where more young people are. I guess for some of them, they aren't paying council tax themselves. It's sort of something that's a bit distant from their daily thinking. I think it's interesting to note there the percentages that are not in support of an increase for police and for fire has increased over the last 5 years. I think I completely understand that. I think, firstly, life's got tough, hasn't it? It doesn't feel like the national funding situation's getting any easier, and people are being taxed more, so they've got less to say, yeah, I back that. But equally, there's this disconnect I've talked about before in this meeting. People talking down the service, talking up the risk, and not reflecting the reality, which is everybody is a lot safer, not only in the home, but in the street than they've ever been. So it's a real challenge. I think there's a wider point, probably beyond my remit. There's a move at the moment, isn't there, to even consider that 16-year-olds would vote in general elections. Now, they're very unlikely to be paying the council tax. I'm a bit of a fan of you shouldn't really be making choices for people when it might not hurt you. And I believe I'm in line with most 16-year-olds there who don't believe a vote in the general election at 16 is the right thing. So perhaps we revisit that. I want more and more young people to be engaged in their own community safety. Dave and I have had a couple of very eye-opening meetings with young people in various forums. Too few of them don't trust the police, wouldn't necessarily reach for the police for help when they should. Perhaps look for the advice of people who aren't necessarily got their backs like the police service would, which is a pity, and I think we need to do more work there. And they are worried about things, whether it's vaping or bullying online or whatever, they are worried. So I do hope those that did contribute are the ones that have really given it some thought. But yes, I take your point. We'll keep trying to grow these numbers. They need to be big enough so this consultation isn't skewed by those who perhaps work in the services or are very close to them and have an interest. So I am keen that we grow and grow these consultation numbers. And it's getting closer, isn't it, to those that don't want to see any more money. I guess if I'd framed it differently, do you think police should have more money? They'd probably say yes. Out of your household budget, then 46% said not really. So it's a different question, isn't it?
It certainly is. And I know from my own authority that we've consultation out on our own budget, we have seen an increase in participants. So I think that's in line, in a sense, with what you're doing. But again, the same question really is, you know, is quite clear. How do we attract the next young people? Councillor David Williams, Cannock Chase.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay? Thank you, Chair. I'd like to follow up on Councillor Dean's question about Tamworth Borough Council's funding restrictions because I think there's a broader pattern here that the panel needs to understand, and we as councillors who have the community safety role regards to this. So, like Councillor Dean said, Tamworth's Community Safety Partnership allocations has been cut from, I think it's 65,000 to 10,000. That's over an 80% reduction. That's not unique to Tamworth. So if you look across Staffordshire, Cannock Chase, which I represent, had a budget of £69,024, which has been reduced to £10,000. That's an 85.5% reduction. And we think about Stoke, that had a 225,000, or just over 225,000 budget. That's now been reduced to 20,000. That's a 91.1% reduction. The total CSP funding across Staffordshire is going to drop from £750,523 to just £300,000, and £200,000 of that money will be controlled by you directly via local policing teams or require competitive bidding. And today, you've repeatedly stated that you don't believe taxpayers should be expected to plug gaps created by national funding decisions. Yet, you're cutting partnership funding by 85%, while maintaining 2,083 police officers, the highest numbers since 2010. So, I think this is a choice, Commissioner, not a necessity. I always struggle with that word. So you could have, as an example, you could have reduced officer posts slightly. That could have saved similar amounts, whilst maintaining prevention partnerships. Instead, you've chosen to protect officer numbers while decimating fundings for youth division, substance misuse prevention, and educational programmes on knife crime and extremism. So my question is, how is forcing Cannock Chase, Tamworth, or Stoke-on-Trent councils to either absorb these costs or cut vital prevention services, which is likely what's going to have to happen in Cannock Chase, any different from the Home Office forcing you to raise the Precept? It's the same local taxpayers, just via district council tax instead of police precepts.
Commissioner?
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I get your point, and you're right, there are choices that I've had to make. I've taken into account the changing geography of local government reform. I know this is tricky. You'll be talking to your residents about it, trying to explain the implications. I've tried to do that, particularly in the partnership space, because holding on to the partnerships, working effectively with them during a period of change, but being realistic, you'll all be in shadow arrangements next year as you move into new unitaries. Just as my office, just as the police service, they have staff thinking, well, gosh, what does it mean for my future here? I think in that period of flux, I've got to be very careful to make sure that this sort of funding, which I think is extremely valuable, I think some people would point at it and say, that's not as valuable as half a dozen additional officers. And given the nature of what's been happening recently, the demand for those officers, I can't step back and not do everything I can to support the operational demand there. It's not a position I want to be in. Actually, part of the picture you've given there, I'll set that out in a bit more detail with your colleagues. I think I've got a community safety forum in a week or so, and we'll detail it, and I'll do a bit of publicity around the bigger fund. And hopefully what I think this will mean is there's about 350, 400,000 that will sit with the new community safety partnerships, and I'll guarantee that until the end of my 2-year term. It will then be for those authorities, of course, to back their residents and contribute some into that pot as well. And I appreciate that you do that. You've got some absolutely tremendous officers working in community safety across Cannock Chase and Stafford, because I know you work together on a lot of those projects. It's not where I want to be, Mr. Williams, but we're being shortchanged at the minute in the community safety arena, and I'm afraid the public are not quite as comfortable, or not quite as as keen to endorse prevention activity, and because of some of the language of the Home Secretary, unfortunately, certainly not as confident as they might have been in my choices as to where to invest. Although those that are close to it know that we make good decisions and we're reducing the demand on the front line.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner, and thanks for acknowledging the importance of those partnerships. But I'm not sure I just want to frame this as a prevention versus officers' numbers. And we all know in here that politics, local government and leadership is about trade-offs. And if we consider this period of flux that we're all entering, not just in local authorities, but also now in policing, because of government decisions, you've spoken about, and the paper talks about, that right-sizing commitments to match the settlement. But when we look at the actual financial position, you're using only 1.48 million of reserves to balance the budget. Your usable reserves stand at 43.7 million. The budget supports reserves of 4.8 million pound available, and I've listened to your arguments around the budget, which seems a sensible position around the reserve. You've not asked for the flexibility above the £15 precept threshold, 15% threshold. The 196 million that's been top sliced by the Home Office might still be allocated later. There's still some uncertainties there. And the final settlement isn't even confirmed yet, the same as the final settlement of what we're going to have in Staffordshire as a local authority isn't confirmed. So are you firing the gun here before you need to? Are you making irreversible cuts to prevention partnerships now based on a partial settlement while sitting on millions in reserves and not exploring those maximum precept options? I note what the public have said in the consultation. If the final settlement is better, or if additional funding is released, these partnerships might have already been reduced or destroyed. I know they're definitely going to have to be reduced in Cannock Chase due to our budget constraints. Isn't this premature right-sizing really about protecting police numbers potentially for optics or framing, rather than whilst passing those real difficult choices to councils? Are you putting us in those local authorities in a difficult position to try and keep those CSPs going?
Chairman, if I may, just because people might be watching this and not quite aware of the what this particular element of funding goes to, and I think Councillor Williams said it's getting on for about £65,000 in Cannock. That all goes on local projects. I don't believe there's much that's actually being used to support the council's investment in their own officer corps. Certainly that was something I sought to limit, because there were some councils that, when I arrived 4 or 5 years ago, had pretty much stripped out their local council officer support roles. I don't believe that was the case in Cannock. And in some cases I flexed this funding to go into those roles because they're so important. Not least because it's the council officers who need access to powers and opportunities that they can bring into play when tackling antisocial behaviour. So over the years I've brought it down so it's more focused on individual projects. I've really pushed hard in recent years to promote the community safety partnerships, which is not with not the success I'd hoped for in terms of communicating what we've been doing together and building public confidence, but also to make sure that those the spend was very much focused on local priorities, local residents' concerns. I think there's been some drift in that space as well. I absolutely refute, Mr. Williams, I'm sorry to say, that this is firing early. You're right here, right now. Local government reform is months away. Your capacity to make decisions on your reserves, your capacity to know where to invest, will be greatly limited over the next 2 years. And I'm afraid the police are in the same situation, and my office is in the same situation. The uncertainty, the delay, there may be promise down the line from reform in several years' time, but right now this is all hard work. What I'm seeking to do actually is to protect an element of spending in these partnership spaces. It's quite difficult because I know we won't have the number of people in community safety at a local level probably in 12, 18 months as we do right now. They won't have the capacity to spend the funding, let alone liaise with the individuals delivering the services and so on. I'll give you an example. It's good stuff, some of this stuff. I went to a terrific project. Dave's been to a few of these as well, put on in schools in South Staffs the other week. Saw some primary school kids absolutely engaged in this session put on by two young actors about online safety, what it meant, hate crime, abuse, bullying, vulnerability, pretty important stuff. Piece I put out on a social network about that was almost resoundingly negative. Spend it on officers, spend it on this, spend it on that. We need to win back that public confidence. Meanwhile, I'll continue to invest as much as possible in the core projects. An absolute focus, by the way, for you, David, and others. In the funding going forward, I'm looking for it to be tied to those local priorities identified by residents in their neighbourhood policing guarantee commitments and for working with the police. It should be the things that worry everybody. And in the next 2 years, if I can hold on to any of that, I will. And by the way, Chair, I'm keeping the commitment to space on that basis as well. So that's support for councils around local provision during the summer holidays to reduce antisocial behaviour. This is not me cutting and running. It's me protecting a space when the force is saying they need every penny they can get. And it's not a battle. They know the value of this prevention work as well, just as you do. But given the situation, the financial situation, and the state of flux we're all in, it's, at the minute, it feels to me it's the best I can do. And the best way, hopefully, to pass that local partnership working conversation over to the new community safety partners. Now, they will be governed, overseen, by council leaders in just 2 years' time. So there's far more flexibility and opportunity to do more in that space. And I think there possibly will be even more buy-in, quite frankly, to those local prevention activities, because they'll have skin in the game. But if the world was different, David, I'd probably continue to be an outlier and provide more local funding for local discretion than anyone else. I just can't afford it anymore.
No, thank you, Commissioner. And like I said, it is about trade-offs, and you know we will be trying as hard as we can in Cannock Chase to continue our efforts, but it will be difficult. But you're right, we are absolutely in the here and now, and especially in local authorities with our budgets coming very soon. So it's that I did, yeah. So we're in that bind too. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Commissioner David, you are requested to come in.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to highlight that point, and I think the Commissioner's made it mostly, to be fair. Two key points for me. I think the language we saw from the Home Secretary describing the PCC model as a failed experiment. That failed experiment she was talking about was this prevention space that has been funded across the country by a lot of commissioners. And I think that's something to reflect on, not just for the current government, but all governments that fail to understand that broader picture of prevention, which I know colleagues in local government do understand really clearly, actually, that national government doesn't always get that. So I think that's quite important to recognise. I think what we do need to think about in the here and now, though, is as we go into LGR, and for a lot of colleagues, with probably the exception of myself, I've never sat on a unitary council in this room, what those new unitaries will look like in terms of the services that they deliver and how they deliver them, things like public health and how does public health work with the community safety agenda, how some of those top tier authority services that we have presently work with some of the what are currently district and borough responsibilities in terms of community safety and how that all works together. I do think this discussion we're almost having here needs to inform how those new councils, whether there is 3, 5, 10, 12, whatever, looks like across Staffordshire as soon as we possibly can, because I think it is a really important space. I think Councillor Williams is right. And I think it's really important we are really clear going into that discussion to shape whatever the future looks like for local government, that it's as impactful as it possibly can. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Commissioner.
Chair, yeah, and it's a shame we haven't got representation from Stoke-on-Trent City Council again. That's a few in a row, isn't it? Because the panel member there is on a unitary council, and he will be aware of the additional investment in community safety partnerships that they make, tying in those authorities, those responsibilities, those departments, public health, children's services, really recognising the value of partnership. I have mixed views about local government reorganisation. I think there's a real risk we lose the local, particularly around planning. But around community safety, I think it will be better in the future. We've just got to get there blinking quick, because it's a distraction for everybody.
Thank you. Not to draw this section on, because I think we're coming up to a period where we'll recess to make a decision on your budget. But something that made me think as well with shared responsibility, and I know we've got Councillor Screen with us, but in terms of the Staffordshire Road Partnership with the Commissioner and the County Council's role in that. And it's a bit like the question that both Councillor Dean and Williams has raised. There's important work that's done there, and obviously it's ensuring that that is also protected, because we are seeing levels of abuse on our roads that probably have never been experienced before, and certain areas of Staffordshire also we've got the horrible situation of fatalities. So it's something that I want to be sure of, that this budget that we've got is also going to protect that.
Thank you, Chair. Couldn't agree more, and that's why it's a priority in my plan, and it's going to stay there. We had some numbers the other day on road fatalities. They're still going in the wrong direction despite every effort of the whole partnership. The partnership funds itself through enforcement, particularly around training programs that are offered to people in lieu of prosecution. But boy, oh boy, is it a challenge. I'll just bring Dave in, because he's making some changes around governance, amongst other things, and that is partly to assure that partnership stays together. It's something that he and I really value.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Chair. There are changes in governance at the Safer Roads Partnership, as Councillor Screen is aware. We met, Councillor Screen and I, with, actually Stoke gave apologies, just for a change, about 2 weeks ago, I want to say now. So both top-tier local authorities will become vice-chairs of the partnership. We'll retain the chair, so you've got that sort of tripartite governance, really, and in terms of how we work together, because, again, I think through the police reform, local government reform, any other form of reform we get with a small r, we need to reassure ourselves that partnership, A, goes through that process in a seamless way, so we continue the work we're doing, we don't lose momentum, we don't slow down, but also making sure, again, as that new structure comes into being, that it is as robust as possible. The force of putting quite a lot of investment through the road crime team, which I think is having some real benefits, not just in terms of victims, but also in terms of policing the roads and denying criminals the use of the roads. But we do need to do more. As we'll all know, fatalities are still far too high, and they are stubbornly sticking like that. The government has just launched its new road safety strategy, which is out for consultation at present. There are a number of parts to that, Chair, and I know I am planning to respond to it, actually. Some of the stuff, though, that I think we can really benefit for in Staffordshire that is in there, things like locally set speed limits. We have a real challenge with, actually, you know yourself, actually, in Lichfield, but also in East Staffs and other parts, the rural parts of the county, where we have national speed limit roads, which if you ask for a road safety audit right now, we'll say that's safe because nobody's going that far over the national speed limit. Well, actually, I think we need to start asking the question, is the national speed limit appropriate for some of those roads? I think that's challenge we'll all be really clear on. I think it's how we join councils up and the police in terms of our data sets, and the partnership is quite keen to see we push on that. It's how we make sure that we hold the force to account to ensure that incident data is kept up to date through police systems so that we have accurate data, but also it's done as quickly as possible. So there is a lot of work to do. The partnership is quite dedicated to continue. You certainly have that assurance from me as chair, and I'm sure Councillor Screen would join me in that as the new vice chair as well. And as we go through this whole reform piece, it is important that piece of work carries on, actually, because that's something that isn't going to change. Whilst we are all very involved in various bits of reform, actually, to the public out there, they just want to drive on the roads and make sure they're going to get home safely, and that's what we want for them. So we need to continue to work on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I know that obviously there is work being done, and obviously we'd like to see that continue. But local government organisation's got a lot to answer for, hasn't it, just at the moment? But there we go. Hopefully it'll all settle down, and we've got our new future planned out. Right, I am going to then ask the panel to recess for a few moments to make, we'll have a small discussion or a large discussion, a robust discussion on what we've just been discussing, and we hope to be with you momentarily. So just at the present moment, I'll formally close the meeting, and we will recess and then come back. Thank you. Okay, thank you for your patience, and we are now have made our deliberations on the information presented to us, following what I felt was a very robust challenge from members. And I also appreciate, Chairman, Commissioner, your responses were as helpful as we could probably have under what we consider, all of us consider, in many terms, very much difficult times. So whilst we don't always agree what we've got in front of us. So I've got the recommendations on page 25. There are a number that we have got to agree to. Within it, obviously, is the main part that we've been discussing in terms of the increase within the council tax based on property D, band D. So I'm looking for a proposer to accept the budget and precept as requested. So I've got Councillor Atkins proposing and Councillor Merrick as seconding. If there's no call for a name vote, then I'll take show of hands. Is there a call for a name vote? No. So if we could then go straight to the show of hands, if you could keep them raised to be sure that we're counting correctly. Those in favour of the proposal that we accept the precept and budget set by the Commissioner, would you please indicate if you are for? And against? One. Okay. So, Commissioner, goes without saying, you've obviously seen the result. You have your precept and budget that will be put forward to the council tax. I think you will find, though, there is going to be further scrutiny over it as we go along, because it would be very remiss of us if we didn't. So to see those challenges, to see that we keep to them, and obviously if there are any sudden expectations and changes of windfall and so forth, we'll no doubt be expecting something that will help us all out. There is a great concern in this. It is something that we don't necessarily wish to do by the heart, but we have to recognise by the head that we've got something that in terms of accepting it going forward. So thank you for that. I'd like to then move on to our next part of the agenda, which is item 7, and it's the police fire misconduct and complaint report, annual report for consideration. Commissioner?
Thank you, Chairman. This is a report just updating the panel on the statutory function. Just to remind those that might be watching in, I think there's 2 or 3 Commissioner's offices that actually undertake the management of police and fire complaints. The majority of Commissioners don't do that. We scrutinise the activity, and we are involved in managing appeals or reviews. So if somebody's unhappy with a complaint finding, then it's members of our team that undertake to review them. Complaints, for me, are one of the most important parts of the service. I'm looking for the police to not only take everyone seriously, but to really look for ways in which they can improve and learn as a result of the responses. The majority of responses, as you'll see in the paper, are around the way in which police keep people up to date during investigations. An awful lot of it comes down to communication, Chair. It's about service levels. Whilst some individuals are disappointed at the outcome, provided they're kept up to date, they can understand the rationale, can see a really thorough investigation's taken place, and they're treated fairly, then even if things don't go the way they would have hoped, they will be left with a good impression. So contact service, being kept up to date, being able to get information when you need it is so key, and that's why I'm not going to let up on our commitment to improving the force contact and communication. Nothing radically different here from previous years. I am pleased to see that the times we're taking to address reviews is below the national average, and some way below at 36 days, some way below the 68 days of our most similar forces. And I'm pleased to see that the number of reviews has reduced this year, although the percentage of them that are upheld has increased. Now, by upheld, that means that my team have determined that actually the way in which the outcome has been arrived at, there's typically some room for learning from that, whether it's individuals or the organisation to take account of it. There's some merit in that. So we are there to sort of hold the service very much to account. I'll leave it there, Chair, except to say it's a decent report. We lost a fantastic officer this year who used to look after this for me. She died suddenly. Anyway, rest in peace, Veronica. Sorry, Chairman, back with you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I do appreciate that. It was very hard recognising good officers that are taken away from us unexpectedly. So, deepest sympathies. So, councillors and panel members, are there any questions that you would like to raise within this section of the report? If not, I will go straight to the recommendation. The panel note the context and agree to receive annual updates for scrutiny at future meetings. Can we accept those, please? Thank you very much. In accordance. So, moving on then to the agenda item 8 was the National Conference of the Police, Fire and Crime panels, commissioners I should say, and panels through the England and Wales, I think it is. So there's a report before you. I did attend online. Very frustrating being online, trying to follow a conference, but I think there is talk of going back to face, which does give you what I felt what is grossly missing when you're doing something online is that very valuable in networking. To understand how other authorities and other panel members are coping with the role. But again, LGR and certainly now is going to have a pan out. So, are there any Mandy? I don't think we need to brief anything unless members have got a specific area. It's worth attending, but I have to say it was hard work. trying to keep up with online. It's not easy. I don't care what anybody says. I much prefer proper breakout rooms and so forth in conference. So that's before us for noting. And Commissioner, yes, would you like to comment?
Apologies, Chair. There's reference on the back page in your report there, where commissioners have taken over fire and rescue serveries, they will switch with police. What does that mean? Is that in relation to the new policing boards, etc.?
It serves me right. There's very few, because you are aware, that commissioners have the responsibility of fire. Yeah. But it was, I think, a comment that came that if that was to change, can you remember, Mandy?
I can't remember.
No, I'm pretty sure that that's where the comment came, because there was only, 3 or 4 of us in the room that would be able to, comment on fire. But I can try and get that clarified if you wish, Commissioner, but thanks for raising it. Okay, so if that's acceptable by members, we'll note the conference and hopefully next time it might be in person. Agenda 9, questions from the panel members. Could I open up? I know that you partly have alluded to various things in your preamble on the budget and precept. Is there anything more you would want to say, Commissioner, with regards to the decision of last week or the end of the previous week over the constabularies joining in, etc., that change as it's been proposed? Is there anything you would like to add that you haven't already mentioned?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, no doubt members will have noted the white paper announcement by the Home Secretary last Monday. We've had expectations of this for some time, and certainly a number of rumours that were being circulated about a big reduction in the number of police forces. The number's been mooted at something between maybe 10 and 15, which means it might well mirror the regional structure we're involved in at the moment for regional organised crime, where we're in partnership with West Midlands, Warwickshire and West Mercia. There's a review out being conducted now independently, and we should hear back in the summer, which I think is no coincidence it ties in with some of the devolution clarity that is expected by authorities in the summer. Seems to be a move away from tying police and fire functions to mayoral boundaries, which is causing some confusion. A commitment to local policing areas, again, some confusion on what the geography might mean. I think for me, the two areas that are most concerning are how will police continue to be funded if there's a disconnect with the local council tax. If there aren't clear electoral boundaries, we've got a problem, because you can't set tax without some local accountability. And that will be a massive change. Right from the time of Peel, there's been a link back to the public funding. Certainly previously, when these proposals were mooted, I believe under the early days of Tony Blair's government, it was actually balancing the finances that did for the proposals, because there is a very, very big difference between how much is contributed in cities compared with county areas. So the main concern, as I've set out already, is the confusion, the potential for inertia, people not making decisions that they should be making in the next few years about investment, and whether indeed it will realise any of the savings. There's bits I very much agree with. The potential for a national forensics service, moving the National Aviation Service under a central body rather than the governance at the moment across 43 forces. More consistency around IT and procurement, less local choice on training, uniforms, fleet, things of that nature. They should deliver efficiencies, but we mustn't underestimate the amount of work that's going to have to take place to move from one body to another. My biggest concern is around two words. In the policing protocol at the moment, chief constables are bound to give due regard to the Home Office, the Home Secretary. Due regard. That means where a local chief deems there is a bigger risk, if you like, or a focus, it is for them to make the decision as to what they police. It is now moving to must deliver. I think that's serious. We've talked, some people misunderstand. I don't politicise policing. That politicises policing. And it's a risk. It's a risk for the future that a police force is directed by central government. We've always maintained this separation within law in this country, and I would support that. So hopefully it's a genuine consultation and people can push back and say to that particular element of it, not in your Nelly, but we'll see. What is for sure is it's going to be a really a concerning time for some people in those services, understandably. And the proposal that some of this might not actually happen for several years doesn't give me any comfort. If you're going to make a change, just get on with it. Get it right and get on with it. A drift of several years and even through a general election means this might be a false start and some of it not happen, which isn't in anybody's interest. So I'll keep you informed, Chair. I've no doubt there'll be more rumours, and then we'll see what happens for real.
Thanks for that. I think it's important that was necessarily aired and to make sure that anybody that is also listening to this, that where your feelings are with regards to it, although obviously not your decision. So, but we're all going to be very much. I keep an eye on it, and as you say, listen to the rumours, squash the rumours, and we'll see what comes out of it. So, thanks, Commissioner. Are there any other questions, Councillor Atkins?
Who decides which offenders are publicised in the media, and what criteria are used in that selection? I'm not going to name the person, obviously, but a particular case where someone was publicised who does have significant mental health issues, and as a result, a more severe impact, should we put it that way. So I really wondered, obviously there were offences all over the place, and how is that decision made about which offenders should, face the glare of publicity, both in terms of the print media and indeed in terms of social media?
I believe police communications work to some quite strict criteria on this, and there's a public interest. The public do want to see justice being done. Typically when somebody's been convicted, there'll be some sort of notice. I must say my own opinion is I have a bit of a mixed view on this personally, the sort of photographs and so on. And I do take your point around certain people's vulnerability. Not to downplay that. I mean, we had that terrible situation, didn't we, with that attack on those young people in Nottingham, where clearly the gentleman was extremely disturbed. That doesn't mean it's not in the public interest to completely understand the situation. Councillor Atkins, you've got a particular concern I wouldn't mind just knowing about the individual one, and I'll do some double checking. What I would want there is for everybody to be essentially treated the same and consistently, so that the force isn't at risk of under or overplaying any particular case. But actually police forces in recent years have been criticised more often for not disclosing information rather than the opposite.
If I send the case to Mandy and then she can relay that on to you, and I'll give you the reasons why I think it's particularly poor judgment in this particular case.
Okay. Any other questions from members? Take that then as a no. So we'll move on to our next item, item 10, and it's with regards to an independent member, the resignation of Mr. Adrian Bowen. It is with sadness that we have received his resignation, but as he is no longer a resident of Staffordshire, going to the neighbouring county of Shropshire and Shrewsbury, he obviously no longer qualifies. So he has duly resigned. I think I'd like to lead my sincere thanks to Adrian for his very wisely contribution over the last 4 years, certainly on the panel, but I think he's also had previous service in previous authorities in terms of the police authority. So he's brought a lot to the table, which I think we ourselves as equal laymen in one respect, I think that we valued that. So we now go through a process of advertising, but I would like to obviously invite any member who wishes also to make their sincere thanks to Adrian if you were wanting to. If not, we'll move on. Okay. So thank you for that. We're going to miss Adrian, but I will formally write to him in due course. Item 11 is our work programme, and going forward, we obviously have done the business for today. We've got next week, we've consider the Commissioner's proposal for the fire and rescue budget and precept, and possible questions and decisions made by the Commissioner. Then we will have a reserve date of the 16th, depending on the outcome of the 9th of February. Then on the 13th of April, business to be confirmed. I will confirm that there will be a meeting where we will discuss the review of the policy of the panel. So we've had some working group meetings on that, so we will then have that robust discussion on the outcomes of that. So please ensure that's in your diaries, members. Then going forward in terms of draft, we will then be in a new municipal year. So 22nd of June, there'll be some panel training in a sense for those that may join us from each authority. You do see some change, not a wholesale change, but we do see change. So obviously training is important. That's in private, those training sessions. Then our main meeting, 27th of July, we'll appoint chair and the vice chair and go through the annual report and management of complaints and conduct matters against the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner. Home Office grant, we will see that, and then consideration for the Commissioner's annual report 25-26, and decisions made by the Commissioner. I won't necessarily then read the rest going in, because there could be significant change to any new committee. Might look at a work programme and think they'd like to do things differently. And that's your opening now. Is there anything, members, you would like for us to consider going forward that we should be looking at? Mr. Elliott.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like for us to consider as a panel to propose looking at some assurance around the efficiency savings that you're looking for, because they're going to get more difficult to deliver. And also the risks around the investment around digital data and technology, and particularly the one that sticks out for me is the ERP implementation, 27, 28, 28, 29. They can go wrong really badly, and I know there's some reserve for IT transformation projects, but there are examples of where that's people have spent 7 or 8 times more on ERP implementations than was planned. So I do know the City of London Police did a risk discovery exercise on this, and it might be something that we might want to consider just in terms of getting that assurance from yourself around that expenditure.
Proposal there. So I think if I can receive agreement, we'll add that to our work programme. We'll have a discussion how we fit that in, obviously having a discussion with the Commissioner's office to see how and when we can bring that forward. But thank you for that. I think that's a very valid point in addition to the work programme going forward. So if there's nothing else left on that side of things, members, I'd like to go to item 12 of the agenda, and this is the exclusion of the public. And I, as Chair, wish to move that the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business, which involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in the paragraphs of Part 1 of Schedule 12A, brackets as amended, brackets, of the Local Government Act of 1972, indicated below. So I'll just pause until the room has been